So we know you're going to be talking to us today about identity protection. So people really want to know why identity protection is so important, Adnan. So
That's good. It's very important, especially when you're on
yeah,
the internet, being secure.
yeah, sure. So I guess it's over to you now, Adnan.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks for having me. So hello and welcome everybody to my session on Azure AD Identity Protection. I'm Adnan Hendricks. You guys can follow me on all social media channels with @microspecialist. I'm always sharing my latest bit of Azure information that I can get my hands on. And from time to time, I also do a session with Kazim monthly for the LASU every now and then. So thanks to the LASU CBT for organizing this event, and also all the sponsors and everybody else who's supporting the event. You know, everybody's doing quite a good job in making sure that we really developing our skills, especially at the LASU. Kazim has been doing a great job. So thanks you also for having me again for this event. So the most important thing about doing the session with you guys, and especially for you guys that maybe aren't used to the cloud, well, if you're using something like Office 365, you're using a Microsoft Azure AD identity. And just like Kazim mentioned this morning or earlier, you know, when you log into your computer, you're using an identity. So now we're working in the cloud with cloud identities. My main objective for the session is just to show you how you can protect that identity, get started immediately. And my main thing, me personally, I like to do minimum effort with maximum impact. So something small and quick that you can do to secure your identity and ensure that it's a lot safer for you guys to use. So basically, we're going to look at just how people are working right now, what Azure AD Identity Protection is. We're going to look at risk and how identity protection works. And then we're also going to talk about how you can enable zero trust through some of the policies that identity protection provides for you guys. So now I'm sure most of you guys, in fact, if not the whole world, has been affected by the whole COVID-19 pandemic. But even before then, people were already working remotely. And especially now in this day and age, the whole nature of how people work, I'm sure you see those ads of all the, you know, Instagram businesses, people working all over the world from any location, and they're still being able to generate some income. Now, in saying that, when moving to the to that kind of working environment, the conventional security tools, you know, won't just be good enough for those kind of environments. So with that, you know, there's the cost of breaches, regulations to ensure that data sovereignty or data is only allowed in certain locations with those kind of, you know, regulations in place. So there's a lot of things that we need to traverse in this new way of work. And in saying that, we look at the identity as the control plane, especially with Office 365 at the center with your Azure AD identity. So we can leverage that same identity within our own environment or tenant, and also utilize them with partners, customers, and cloud applications. And having a cloud identity allows us to also do things on different kinds of devices, and also in some cases manage those devices. Now, in saying that, you might have an identity and you might sign in on a specific device. You might use some sort of application or data. You also want to ensure that, you know, if in case somebody does try to breach you, that you are aware of that. So now when looking at Azure Active Directory, these are just some of the numbers, and Azure AD is the world's largest cloud identity service. So they're driving huge numbers with more than 200,000 Azure AD Premium organizations using it, and 345 plus million Azure AD active users. And then if you look at the daily authentication requests of all those identities, you're looking at 30 billion plus daily authentication requests happening. So these are quite huge numbers, and just by looking at those daily authentication requests, even if it's just a small percentage that might get breached, it's still a huge number, especially if you're looking at 10% of 30 billion, you know, it's still a large number. So with Azure AD, you can do a lot of things. You can modernize your access. So provide single sign-on for users with cloud applications, self-service, and basically with cloud identity, you can sign in simply from any device across the world. You can have security and governance, so you can safeguard your identities and credentials. And this is where we can have better authentication or stronger authentication, and have things like conditional access. So where based on a specific condition, I only get access to my data or my resources. And identity protection kind of falls into this pillar of Azure AD, and the security, where we can protect our identities based on some of the learnings that Microsoft provides. So there's some more things like identity governance, privileged identity, and then with Azure AD, you can also connect and collaborate with partners and customers. For example, like we're doing right now, the LASU, Kazim, in their tenant, they added my own personal identity, so I can provide this service within Teams. So, you know, so that collaboration, me using my own account instead of an LASU account, Azure AD allows us to do that. And then there's tons of more integration with the identity platform, etc., etc. But looking at those big numbers, you know, credentials are constantly at risk of a breach. This is just the facts. You guys are aware of identity theft. So 81% credential theft, you know, people using duplicate passwords. And sometimes in some organizations, employees are using non-approved applications for work, or those applications might be you know, developed by hackers that are trying to get your passwords. So those things are just the facts. You know, there's daily hacks occurring. Some people use easily guessed passwords, and even if you're an IT expert like this guy that lives in my town, you know, it can still happen to you. You know, so identity theft is quite big, and there's you know, the security is getting better on the Microsoft side with using artificial intelligence. You know, hackers and rogue actors are also using sophisticated tooling. If you look at the rise of deep fakes, where you can manipulate a video, so you'll get the video feed and the voice of a person, and it's just been fabricated by someone else, and it's not a true video. Same thing with cached credentials, easy to get, and phishing and spoofing is still number one. And that's where I want to show you this next bit, where there's been a large amount or increase of password spray attacks, because, you know, and this is where the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic across the world has kind of created this increase, because everybody had to work remotely. So, you know, due to the fact that most people aren't working within their corporate environments, they using home internet or other forms of internet than the company. There's been a large increase in these kind of brute force attacks. So password spray is really just trying to use the same password across multiple accounts. And then you have phishing, which is normally just a fake website trying to lure you to enter in your identity and your real password so they can use that and access your data. So large numbers since last year, and it's just been increasing and increasing. So Azure AD Identity Protection is really intelligence Microsoft has gained and used, which is based on all the billions of authentications, the large numbers that I've shown you, with all the Azure AD identities that they manage and host, and also things like Xbox. If you have a Outlook or live email account, so they use all those authentications from those signals, and they basically look at those signals and evaluate the risks from the different systems. So they use artificial intelligence, and there's also human teams that look at this insights and information, and then based on all these signals and information that they've gathered, they can provide actionable insights. So these insights determine whether those authentications are valid or invalid. So if it's the actual identity or person trying to sign in onto their tenant or email or Xbox or whatever resource, etc., or is it a potential threat or hacker that's trying to gain access to the system? So that's where, with those insights, they can send an alert to say, well, this is a risk sign-in, or a risk has been detected. And then based on those signals that Microsoft provides, we can automate detection and remediation of those identity-based risks. And we can also view and investigate them through the portal and do a lot of things with that information. So like I said, I like to focus on minimum effort with maximum impact. So Azure AD Identity Protection is basically a service that Microsoft provides. And this is where I'm taking you to the next slide. So they basically provide it if you have the license for it. So with Azure AD Premium P2, you'll be able to gain access and utilize identity protection to its fullest capabilities. So what that does give you is the vulnerability and risk accounts detection, also risk events investigation, and allow you to use risk-based conditional access policies. So with the P2, you can get access to all the insights from the signals and also the remediation, and provide conditional access policies, so you can do conditional access or provide access through a zero trust principle. So just to show you my next slide. So this is where you can see Azure AD Security Overview. So if you go into Azure AD Identity Protection, you can have a look in a nice dashboard and see which identities are at risk. So easy to read information. You can further drill down into that information and see which account has been accessed and what kind of risk that account is having. So this is where I'm going to jump into my first demo and just give you an Azure AD Identity Protection walkthrough, and we can have a look and see what else we can view with that information. So let me go to. So yeah, I'm signed into my demo Azure Active Directory, and as you can see, I have the Azure AD Premium P2 license in place, and I can scroll down to security. So it's listed under security, and this is where I have protections and manage. I'm just going to go straight to identity protection for now. Later, we can have a look at the conditional access part. So this is where I'm just going to filter my date range. So nothing, I've been okay for the last 30 days, luckily, but in the past 90 days, I can see there were certain risky users detected that Microsoft has found, and also risky sign-in. So I can go and look at these different risky information. I can also view my identity secure score. We'll go look at the risky users in a moment. So identity secure score, and this is where I get information from Microsoft based on the type of business that I am in the specific industry, whether it's the kind of business that I have, financial or oil and gas or manufacturing, etc. I can change my industry here. And Microsoft basically gives you advice on what you can do to increase your security posture in your Azure AD. So for example, just by enabling MFA, I can increase my score, and I can see my user impact and also my implementation cost. So I can just select something and they can show me how I can go and resolve that. And I can also action that. And as I do or tick off all these things that increases my security posture, I'll get a better score. So right now my demo is pretty lousy, you know, at 16.75. So there's a lot of things that I can do to increase my security posture. So I'm just want to go back to identity protection, and this is where you can see if I go to risky users again. So an account is risk. I can look at the risk level, so it's low. What happened? I can look at risky sign-ins and get information on that. I'm just going to drill down to last month. Let me go to risk detections. So this is where I can see that some has been maybe password spray detection, and it will give me the reason that it's been given a risk, and also show me the sign-in location. I can view this information and I can see, well, I don't have anybody working in that location, so this is good information for me. So I can either, you know, disable the account, reset the password, check with the user, you know, and see how we can protect that even more. So with identity protection, I have user risk and I have sign-in risk. So this is where I can specify a specific remediation policy. For example, select which user it should apply to, and also the type of risk that I have. So basically, Microsoft's identity protection will raise an alert whenever a risky user identity might be at risk. So this is where I can specify if it's high or if it's medium and above. If it's low, I don't really have to worry about it, you know, but basically the chance that this might be a specific breach or somebody trying to access this identity might be medium or high. So this is where I always recommend start off with the high alerts, and then you can specify what needs to happen if high risk has been added. So you can block the access, or you can still allow access if it's medium and above, because it might just be a user that's entering his incorrect password a few times, or maybe he has been traveling or needs to access something remotely. So that can kick off a false positive. So depending on how you want to implement this, you can either immediately, especially block and allow access. And then what we can do is we can go and enforce the policy so that it's immediately active, or not enforce it directly, and it will just be reported on. So this is where I can also do sign-in risk with the same thing. Specify the user, what kind of risk I've selected high, and in my case, the control I said block access, and also enforce it. So if a identity is being accessed and the risk is determined for that sign-in or for the user as being high, it will just block the access. And then there's also an MFA registration policy that I can implement to specify that Azure AD MFA registration needs to be enforced. So how does it look in practice? If I go to a account that I have, so this is where one of my identities is logging on. So this is where we can see a normal sign-in. Okay, I had it on the screen too long. This is just a normal sign-in, a user, a valid ID, and he gets to sign in and access corporate information through the access panel. And he can access his information and data. And for my next demo, I'm going to use the same account, but by using a Tor browser. It should kick off a anonymous login and provide a risky sign-in. I'm just going to sign in. Enter the password. Oh. Let's just try that again. So it's blocking the sign-in because this Tor browser is trying to provide an anonymous sign-in. So if I go back to my portal and I look at my reports, let's just refresh. Okay, while that is refreshing, we'll go back, but as you can see, it has blocked that risky sign-in through the anonymous browser. So I'm just going to continue back with my session. So I've just given you the walkthrough. So basically, identity protection analyzes the likelihood and severity of a user identity being compromised, and also the chance of that sign-in being a risky sign-in. So these are some of the things that get checked. So whether it's being activity from an anonymous IP address, or a confirmed user is compromised, or IP address, atypical travel, leaked credentials, because the way the signals work is they also try and find dumps and things on internet that might have or contain the credentials of the user with the password, or pawned accounts, linked IP addresses, password spray, or any unfamiliar type of activity. So all these signals, all these trends and identities logging in, identity protection will have a look at those. So looking at the policies quickly, so some of the sign-in risk, the risk that a sign-in has been compromised, I've shown you in the portal how you can look at the policy that mine has been configured on high. and then also the MFA registration policy, where you basically select which users you want to have a look at, the controls of those users, whether it's being the type of risk, and whether you want to enforce it. So with identity protection, it will just intelligently detect and respond to those compromises. So those machine learning intelligence look at real-time sessions, and they basically feed into the Microsoft intelligence ecosystem, looking at these, and based on those signals, you can also extend the threat intelligence to other security software like cloud, MCAS, Azure ATP or Defender, and even Azure Sentinel, where you can further analyze and investigate these threats in your environments. So it's really more relevant than ever. So these machine learnings are deployed, constantly updated and analyzed, looking at those data. So all those end user generated authentications and sign-ins viewed at not only by artificial intelligence, but also security researchers and dedicated human labelers that look at those data. And they always use these high quality heuristic-based detections and analytics on those data patterns. So just to show you quickly what the password spray sort of looks like over time. So different accounts trying the same password, and they heuristic detection or the intelligence basically look at the number of failures per IP or user. So whether they're coming from the same location or spread locations, but these things that happen in short space in time after one another. So basically the attacker will try and sign in. The analytics will look at the behavior of the traffic, and if the user is a normal sign-in, there's no alert. If the machine learning thinks there is an attack, the machine learning model will run millions of different kinds of checks. Look at the models. They'll be they look at things like IP reputation, the type of behavior, the endpoint of the agent, and if all those analytics checks out, like there is no threat, it means there's not an attacker, it's the actual user. If it's bad, the alert is the sign-in or the user is set as compromised. So basically with all these signals, we can go further, and if we know that there's a risky sign-in or a user has been at risk, we can enable zero trust through things like conditional access and using risk-based policy. So I just want to quickly jump back into my demo. So this is where we can have a look. So as you can see, my view has refreshed. You can see that my account, it showed anonymous IP address. It was a high risk, so that's why it was blocked. And I can have extra information and drill down into those options. But going into conditional access, this is where I can create a policy that will use that sign-in risk. So I can apply based on the sign-in risk, whether a user has access to my applications or environment. So I've already set up something in respect of time. So this is where I have created a policy that I specify a specific user or group. So all my users are in my conditional access risk policy, and I've specified which applications they allowed to use or which ones I want to monitor. So these might be my high profile applications that I want to ensure that only valid users and sign-in risks access them. And then my conditions. So that's really what conditional access is. You can get access to a company resource if certain conditions are met. So I have selected my user risk. If my user risk is high and my sign-in risk is high or medium, then I want to block access. So I've specified block access. At the same time, I can have changed my policy in a different way where I have only specific conditions or other conditions that I want to specify. So I can also grant access if it's medium, for example, and then I can have the option require multi-factor authentication. So an extra check to ensure that it is the correct user, which means that not only the identity and the password is compromised, but also the chance that the second factor would be compromised would be less. So there's a number of other options that I can also enable. So this is where I can enable the policy or just have it in report only mode. So I always recommend to have these on in report only mode and see what the expected behavior and effect is on those kind of actions in your organization. So with conditional access, we will only give access if the risk is low or there's no risk. So providing a zero trust security model. So moving on to my session. So by using those signals, we can verify every access attempt to applications or data by evaluating the user risk and the sign-in risk based on all those risky signals and detections. And then depending on how we set up the policy, we can either block access entirely if the risk we deem is too high, or we can still grant access if the risk is medium or low and request things like an MFA challenge and ensure that it is the user. Because if we look at the number of authentications happening in a medium-sized company, or if we look at a large tenant with hundreds of thousands of accounts, it's kind of difficult to manually go through that information. So you always need to use automation and ensure that you have remediation and those kind of things in place. Now, as the end user, for example, the account that I've shown you, there's also the my sign-in functionality where an end user can view in his own account his different sign-in locations. Maybe if we just quickly jump into the session that I have, we can see if we can view that here with this account. Oh, yes, he's been blocked. Okay, never mind. Let's just skip that then. I thought it would still be cached, but it's working as it should. I'm just going to go back to the screenshot. So in the location where I've clicked, if you go to your account under myapps.microsoft.com, sign in, and with your account information, you get the option to view your sign-in. So you'll be able to see a location graph, so a little map of the location, the operating system, the type of browser, the public IP address, and also with the specified account. So you, as the end user, can specify, hey, this wasn't me, raise an alert, or it was you, and it will just ignore that risky sign-in if it's not been blocked, obviously. So there's other ways we can interact with the identity protection information through Microsoft Graph and there's also a PowerShell module that you can evaluate. So this is where we can use the Graph Explorer to get things like risk detections, create conditional access policy, and also manage compromised users through the API graph for automation, and especially for people that are automating these kind of things in their environments instead of going through the Azure portal. So as I've said as well, with Azure Sentinel or other security products like MCAS, Defender ATP, Cloud App Security, or security products that offer extensive security protection and allow you to view the entire threat landscape from start to finish. You can feed these identities protection data, or it will just be listed and you can view and act on those signals and alerts that have been generated through these products. So once again, for those of you that are using Azure AD, things like the Identity Secure Score, where you can do improvement actions based on the items that's provided for you. You just have to follow the advice that Microsoft gives and to secure your environment much better than the defaults. So what's next for you guys to do? So some of my advice for people that are using Azure AD or Office 365 is to definitely use, or just about any cloud identity or identity for that matter, use multi-factor authentication, at least turn it on. Ensure that you are licensed for Azure AD Identity Protection, Azure AD Premium P2. Have a look at those identity reports, because the identity protection really just provides the signals. You as the administrator still have to act on those signals. So it's really just letting you know this has kicked off a high alert, you know, for the user or for the sign-in, and it's still your own responsibility what you need to do with it. So this is where you can go and generate those conditional access user or sign-in risk policies. I always recommend start off in audit mode so you can have a look and see at how it you know, is evaluated, and then afterwards, once you've had a look at them, you can enable the block mode or grant with MFA. So one of the things that you will need to do is ensure that you have blocked legacy authentication, so you can use conditional access. You can also use conditional access to ensure that you block any legacy authentication. So legacy authentication are all those forms-based types of authentications where just the username and a password is asked, and you can't really provide conditional access. So it's not really claims-based, and those are generally older products. So all the latest Microsoft products and newer third-party products are generally cloud ready or able to be used with a cloud identity that provides the use of conditional access. And I've shown you where end users can view their own risky sign-ins. So that's also something that you need to constantly try and, you know, help your end users evaluate, have constant look at, has it been their sign-ins? Because it's quite, if you have an easy to guess password, you know, it's quite scary what happens on the internet, because these things are constantly being, you know, hacked. So that's pretty much my session. You know, if there are any questions, let them Kazim know. Thank you to the LASU CBT for hosting the LASUTECHX conference. It's really been a pleasure for me to provide the session for you guys, and I hope you've learned something new. And for the rest, for those of you that have extra questions, you can go and either let Kazim know. I don't know if we have time for questions. You can also contact me on social media. Follow me on Twitter at MicroSpecialist. I've been happy to be here.
Okay.
Thank you from Adnan Hendricks.
Yes, thank you very much, Adnan.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for the very powerful session. So there won't be time for questions, unfortunately, but I'm sure since you've shared the handle, and if there are other questions directed to me, so I can try to share them with you. And I'm sure the participants as well can contact you. You've shared your social media handle.
Sure. Or they can have a look at when we're having another session, and then we can do follow-ups then.
Okay, yes, that's true. By the way, we run a monthly webinar on Azure, so we just pick on different topics on Azure to talk about. So if there's also a topic you'd like us to talk about next, so you're very much welcome to mention what topic you'd like us to discuss, and maybe later this month or next month, perhaps myself and Adnan can try to make it happen.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Adnan, again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.